Clear, Karen.
Mr Chair, Norman Kirk once famously said that New Zealanders don't ask for much. They ask for someone to love, somewhere to live, somewhere to work, and something to hope for. Well, Mr Chair, this government is stripping away these things one by one, person by person, community by community, and town by town. It's been described as heartless, it's been described as a shambles, and it is. And it's been described as incompetence, and it is. But the unfortunate and tragic thing about this bill is that it's deliberate. It's a deliberate shambles, and it's deliberate incompetence. It's deliberate, cold, calculated and ugly, and it's an attempt to turn social housing into a contestable market, taking the government out of being a provider or making it just one of many providers, devolving it. It's taking away that core function of the state that ensures a stable house for life. And numerous colleagues have talked about the importance of this that goes back to the 1930s, that it's the essence of New Zealand, of one of the essences of what it means to be a New Zealander is to have these sorts of values, to have a government, to have a state that sees these things as being valued and sees a house for life, sees stable housing for people on low incomes, and sees itself as having an extremely important role in ensuring that these things exist. Unfortunately, this government doesn't, and we're seeing it time and time again as these things are being stripped away, taken away. A number of us have talked about the effect of these, already the effect of these measures in our own parts of our own communities, our own parts of the country, and in our own electorates. I want to talk about some of the issues that are happening in Dunedin, where social housing, where state housing has been an extremely important part of the community of Dunedin, where there is a very high proportion of cold, damp housing in our country, and where the government should be looking at and thinking about ways that it can improve this situation rather than create more and more measures that are putting people in more precarious situations and bringing more insecurity into their lives. The guarantee of stable housing, of a home for life, is being taken away. I want to give a couple of examples because I think it's always important to try and bring these things alive. And I want to talk about the mother with a young child that came into my electorate office to report that her home was damp and that she was constantly taking her child to the doctor with respiratory problems. She believed that there was a spring welling up from beneath the house. Well, Housing New Zealand performed a cursory inspection, but what they really believed and what they told her and my office was that they wondered whether the preschooler was pouring water onto the carpet, and that was creating the issue that was taking that child to hospital. And they didn't want to look beneath the surface, literally look beneath the surface and look for the causes to see what could seriously be done about it. I also want to talk about the woman who's living in a house in the heart of my electorate in South Dunedin in a private rental with 2 small children. Her house opens straight onto a busy road and her 3-year-old can open a locked front door. Housing New Zealand has refused her application because she was not falling behind with her rent in her private rental, because she was borrowing from her parents to pay the private rental. So she was borrowing, trying to do the right thing to pay the rent, and that for Housing New Zealand meant that she didn't qualify. She didn't qualify, and she tried to get a cheaper private rental, but her credit history wasn't good because of all the money she was borrowing, so she was being turned down. She was in a spiral, and she was a classic case of somebody who needed needed that help. She came to my office, and as Mr. Chair.
Claire Curran.
And because it was an individual case with a Member of Parliament standing behind her, Housing New Zealand, and who went to Housing New Zealand to explain fully this situation and to set out the amount of debt that she arranged, they came to the party eventually, arranged for her to move to a fully fenced property near extended family, which was a bonus. Yes, that was a solution, but it took the intervention of a Member of Parliament to get that solution, and unfortunately that's what we're seeing time and time again, is that only when somebody goes into bat and advocates for these people can we get solutions, and even then the solutions aren't always there. These people are not always articulate. They're not always able to set out their case in a way that Housing New Zealand is going to respond to. And what you find, if you can get past the call centre, is that there is often an immovable response. This is only going to get worse, Mr. Chair. I want to just give one more example of the woman who also came into my office with a student loan and significant other debt. To save money, she was staying on her friend's couch. Housing New Zealand said that because she was single and working 20 hours a week, she didn't meet the criteria for application, even though there were vacant Housing New Zealand homes in Dunedin. Again, the intervention of an advocate can help her in her situation. How many other hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are there out there who can't and who don't have and haven't been into the MP's office and are therefore living in worse circumstances and getting into a further spiral of debt? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we know that there are housing shortages. We know that there is an extreme unaffordability of housing in the main urban centres. We know that increasingly low-income New Zealanders are under greater housing stress, with many who are being forced into substandard and overcrowded conditions. This is the time for intervention to empower and to increase the availability of housing, not the time to be taking away the power and making the situation worse for people in these communities throughout New Zealand. In a submission on this bill, the Dunedin Community Law Centre said that this shift is a one-size-fits-all model that does not take into account regional variations and local needs for social housing, and that it takes us away from the core state housing philosophy of stable housing for life. We know that this bill is not good. We know that it must be opposed. We know that we are moving away from that core fundamental New Zealand value of what is important and what helps make our community the way it is, where we believe that social housing is a core function of the state. We cannot support this bill. We have to have action on our housing crisis, on housing shortages and unaffordability. Instead, what we're getting is punitive, cold-hearted, cold hand of the state approach that is only going to make life worse for so many New Zealanders.
Yeah. I'll call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to resume the call that I was so rudely interrupted by the Minister some time ago. I was debating part one. I was up to clause 12. We were discussing the ability of Housing New Zealand to review eligibility for a Housing New Zealand home. And I did ask a number of questions of the Minister which remain unanswered around the kind of data sharing that would be going on between government departments as part of these provisions. And I would really welcome the Minister and the Chair taking up the mantle and responding to those questions which still lay on the table.